The night before the wedding should have been quiet. That was what I told myself as I sat alone on the edge of my bed, the house filled with half-packed boxes of flowers and unopened gifts. In my hands was a thick scrapbook heavy with years. I had worked on it in secret for months, past midnight after long shifts, gluing photographs, writing notes in the margins, pressing memories flat so they could be passed on. On the first page was my son's name, Ethan, written in the same careful handwriting I had used when I labeled his school notebooks decades earlier. I heard the door open without a knock. Vanessa stepped inside. She was perfect in the way magazines define perfection. Polished hair, flawless skin, a posture that suggested she was always in control. Tomorrow she would be Ethan's wife. Tonight she didn't bother pretending warmth. I smiled instinctively, lifting the scrapbook slightly. "I made something for you," I said. "It's Ethan's life. I thought you might like to know." She didn't take it. She didn't even stand closer. She sat down across from me, crossed her legs, and looked around the room as if calculating how much space it took up. "I'll be direct," she said calmly. "After the wedding, things are going to change." My smile froze. "You've been very present," she continued. "But that phase is ending. Ethan and I are building our own life. There's no room for emotional attachments that make things complicated." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I'm his mother." She nodded, unimpressed. "Exactly." Then she said the words that split something open inside me. "It would be best if you didn't come tomorrow. No one wants unnecessary drama." I don't remember what I said after that. I remember the sound of the door closing. I remember sitting there long after she left, holding the scrapbook like it might anchor me to the floor. Ethan's father had left when he was 7. One suitcase. No explanation. From that day on, every role fell on me. I worked double shifts, turned down promotions that required travel, learned how to fix things I couldn't afford to replace. I raised a boy who grew into a man who believed in fairness, who wanted to become a lawyer because he thought the law could protect people who had no one else. And now I was being told I was excess. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I dressed as if I were going to the wedding. I laid out my clothes carefully. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Then I folded the dress and placed it back in the closet. I turned my phone face down. I sat at the kitchen table and waited for the silence to pass. It didn't. By noon the phone began to buzz non-stop. Messages. Missed calls. My sister arrived at my door, breathless, eyes wide. "It's cancelled," she said. "The wedding. It's all over." I thought I had misheard her. She handed me her phone. On the screen were images. Vanessa in someone else's arms, her face unmistakable, the man older, confident. Her boss. Photos taken 2 weeks earlier. Ethan found out minutes before the ceremony. Chaos followed. Vanessa cried. Her parents shouted. Someone accused me of poisoning Ethan against her, even though I wasn't there. By evening, rumors spread faster than facts. Online posts painted me as a bitter mother who couldn't let go, a woman who destroyed her son's happiness out of jealousy. I wanted to disappear. But the truth had its own gravity. In the days that followed, more came out. The prenuptial agreement Vanessa's family had pushed so hard for wasn't protection. It was extraction. Clauses buried deep inside transferred future earnings. Penalties designed to activate if Ethan left within 5 years. Her father was drowning in debt. The marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a rescue plan. Threats followed. Lawsuits were mentioned. Letters arrived written to intimidate, not to win. Ethan was shaken but clear. He refused to lie for her. He refused to be silent. 2 weeks later, Vanessa's family invited us to dinner to resolve things. I went. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I laid documents on the table. Bankruptcy filings, contracts, timelines that didn't lie. I watched as Vanessa's mask cracked, her calm slipping into rage when control left her hands. I watched my son stand up, finally seeing what love had almost cost him. We walked out together. The story didn't end there. A journalist took interest. The truth became public. The narrative shifted. Messages of support replaced the hate. Ethan started over, lighter somehow, as if escaping something invisible that had been tightening around him. Sometimes he thanks me. I tell him he doesn't need to. I learned something through all of it. Love doesn't demand silence. Loyalty doesn't ask you to disappear. And sometimes, The moment you choose yourself is the moment everything else finally makes sense. The weeks after the exposure were quieter on the surface, but underneath, everything was still shifting. Ethan moved back into the small apartment he'd lived in during law school. It wasn't glamorous, thin walls, creaky floors, but it felt honest. The first night there, he sat on the floor with his back against the couch and said almost to himself, "I didn't realize how tired I was until it stopped." I understood exactly what he meant. Vanessa didn't disappear quietly. She posted carefully worded statements about betrayal and privacy, about being misunderstood. Her parents hired a public relations consultant who tried to paint the entire situation as a tragic misunderstanding fueled by an overbearing mother. For a brief moment, the noise threatened to return. But something had changed. People had seen the documents. They had seen the timelines. Truth, once exposed, doesn't retreat easily. Ethan threw himself into work. Not to escape but to rebuild. He took on cases others didn't want. Tenants facing eviction, workers cheated out of wages. One evening, I watched him explain a legal option to a frightened client with the same patience I used to use when helping him with homework. That was when I realized nothing had been taken from him. If anything, something false had been removed. I had my own rebuilding to do. 4 years my life had been defined by endurance. Holding on, pushing through, staying quiet to keep the peace. Without realizing it, I had confused sacrifice with virtue. Now with the noise gone, I started asking myself questions I'd never allowed before. What did I want when I wasn't surviving? Who was I when I wasn't needed? The answers came slowly. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from. I signed up for a writing class I had always postponed. At night, I opened the old scrapbook again, but this time I added new pages. Not about Ethan's childhood, but about my own. Small moments. Small victories. Proof that my life hadn't ended when his independence began. Months later, Ethan received an offer from a firm known for its ethics rather than its prestige. He hesitated before accepting, worried about the pace. Then he looked at me and smiled. "I think this is the right kind of hard," he said. That was how I knew he was truly free. Vanessa tried one last time to reach out. A message, carefully neutral, suggesting closure. Ethan read it once, then deleted it without replying. There was no anger in the gesture. Just certainty. One afternoon, as we walked through a park near my house, Ethan said, "I almost lost myself." I stopped walking and looked at him. "No," I said. "You almost handed yourself over." "That's different." He nodded, thinking. Then he laughed, softly, like someone realizing they'd narrowly missed a storm. Life didn't become perfect after that. It became real. There were still difficult days, still doubts, still moments when old fears tried to resurface. But they no longer controlled the story. We did. I learned that love isn't proven by how much you endure, but by how much truth you allow. I learned that protecting someone doesn't always mean standing in front of them. It sometimes means stepping aside so they can see clearly. And I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish when it prevents a lifetime of quiet damage. Ethan is building a future now, not the one that was planned for him, but the one he chose. I watch from a respectful distance, proud without hovering, present without shrinking. That balance took years to learn and pain to earn. Some stories end with forgiveness. Ours ended with clarity. And clarity, I've discovered, is its own kind of peace. Time passed in a way that felt unfamiliar, steady, unforced. The kind of time that doesn't rush you forward or drag you back, but lets you breathe between moments. Ethan settled into his new routine, early mornings and late evenings, his voice calmer each time we spoke. He no longer sounded like someone bracing for impact. He sounded like someone standing on solid ground. One evening he came over carrying a thin folder. He didn't say much at first, just sat at the table and watched me pour tea. Then he slid the folder toward me. Inside was a letter, handwritten. Not from Vanessa. From himself. He had written it weeks earlier, he explained, on a night when sleep wouldn't come. It was a letter to the man he almost became. The man who confused obligation with love, who mistook control for stability. He didn't ask me to read it. He just wanted me to know it existed. That was when I realized the real damage hadn't been the betrayal or the manipulation. It had been how close he came to doubting his own instincts. How quietly that doubt had grown while everything on the surface looked perfect. The world around us moved on as it always does. New scandals replaced old ones. New outrage cycles began. The articles about Vanessa's family faded into obscurity. Occasionally, someone would still recognize my name and ask if I was that mother. I stopped flinching at the question. I answered calmly, yes, I was that mother. And I didn't owe anyone an explanation beyond the truth. Ethan started mentoring a law student who reminded him of himself. Bright, idealistic, slightly too trusting. One night he told me, I want to teach him how to protect people without losing himself. I smiled because I knew exactly where that lesson came from, even if he didn't say it out loud. As for me, the quiet I once feared became something I cherished. I learned how to sit with my thoughts without turning them into guilt. I learned that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. I began writing more seriously, not to tell the story but to understand it. Putting words to pain didn't reopen wounds. It gave them edges, boundaries, a place to end. There were moments when the past tried to resurface. A song at the grocery store. A dress in a shop window. A sudden memory of that night before the wedding. The way Vanessa's voice had been so calm when she tried to erase me. But those moments no longer held power. They passed through me instead of lodging inside. One afternoon months later, Ethan called me with news he had clearly rehearsed. He had met someone. He was careful as he spoke, not because of fear but respect. I'm not rushing, he said. I just wanted you to know. I told him the only thing that mattered was that he felt like himself when he was with her. He paused, then said softly, I do. After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the light change. I thought about how close everything had come to breaking in ways that couldn't be repaired. I thought about how easily love can be twisted when ambition gets involved. And I thought about how strife often looks like stillness, not confrontation. If there is an ending to this story, it isn't dramatic. There's no final victory speech, no perfect symmetry. There's only this. A mother who learned she didn't have to disappear to prove her love, and a son who learned that choosing himself wasn't betrayal. We didn't win against anyone. We simply stopped losing ourselves. And sometimes that's the most powerful ending of all. Years didn't rush past after that. They unfolded. Quietly. Deliberately. The kind of years that don't announce themselves with milestones, but leave evidence in smaller ways. In how a voice steadies, in how a room feels safer, in how silence no longer hurts. Ethan's career grew not explosively but solidly. He became known not just for winning cases, but for the way he treated people when there was nothing to gain. Clients trusted him because he listened. Colleagues respected him because he didn't need to dominate a room to be heard. Once, after a difficult case, he told me, I finally understand what success feels like. It's not relief. It's alignment. I wrote that sentence down later, afraid I might forget it. The woman he had met, her name was Clara, entered his life without noise. No grand gestures. No pressure. She asked questions and waited for answers. She never treated his past like an inconvenience or a threat. When she met me for the first time, she didn't try to impress or distance herself. She simply said, I'm glad you're here. It was such a simple sentence that it caught me off guard. I realized how rare it had become to be welcomed without conditions. Still, trust is not something that returns all at once. I watched Ethan carefully, not because I doubted him but because I remembered how slowly manipulation works. How it disguises itself as care. But there were no warning signs. No quiet erasures. No subtle competition. When he disagreed with Clara, he didn't shrink. When she disagreed with him, she didn't punish. They talked. They paused. They chose. I stayed where I belonged, close but not inside their space. That boundary, once so painful to imagine, became something peaceful. Love didn't weaken with distance. It clarified. From time to time, reminders of the past surfaced in unexpected ways. A former acquaintance would bring up the cancelled wedding with the curiosity people reserve for disasters that didn't happen to them. I learned how to end those conversations gently but firmly. That chapter is closed, I would say. And for the first time it was true. Vanessa's name appeared once more years later, in a brief article about a failed business venture. No details. No drama. Just another headline swallowed by the endless news cycle. I felt nothing when I read it. No anger. No satisfaction. Just distance. And distance, I learned, is not indifference, it's healing. On my birthday one year, Ethan gave me a small notebook. Inside the cover he had written, for the things you never said out loud. I understood immediately. That night I began writing not about the past but about the present. about mornings that felt unhurried, about conversations that didn't leave bruises, about the strange gratitude that comes after surviving something quietly devastating. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker on, Ethan said something I hadn't expected. "I used to think love meant being chosen," he said. "Now I think it means being seen and staying." I nodded because that thought had taken me a lifetime to learn. There was no final reckoning. No moment where everything snapped into perfect symmetry. Life didn't apologize for what it had taken. It simply offered something different in return. Clarity, steadiness, and the kind of peace that doesn't need to be defended. If someone asked me now what the story was really about, I wouldn't say betrayal or justice or even resilience. I would say it was about timing. About how some truths arrived too late to save a moment but just in time to save a life. And if there is one thing I know for certain, it's this. Love that asks you to disappear is not love. And love that survives truth doesn't need to shout to be real. That understanding stayed with us, quiet, enduring, and finally enough. Time didn't stop testing that understanding. It rarely does. A year after Clara moved in, Ethan faced a choice that would have broken the version of him I once knew. He was offered a partnership, prestigious, lucrative, and quietly poisonous. The firm's reputation was flawless on paper, but its methods weren't. Corners rounded, voices ignored, truth negotiated until it was barely recognizable. He came to me late that night, jacket still on, tie loosened, eyes tired in a way success couldn't disguise. "Old me would have said yes already," he admitted. "Not because I wanted it, but because I was afraid to say no." We sat there for a long time before he added, "I don't want to build a life that requires me to forget who I am." The next morning he declined the offer. That decision didn't make life easier. In fact, it made things slower. There were months when doubt crept in, when bills felt heavier and the future less certain. But something else grew in that space. Integrity without witnesses. The kind that doesn't perform. The kind that holds. Clara saw it too. One night she told him, "I trust you more when things are uncertain." He smiled at that, not because it flattered him but because it felt true. As for me, my own life quietly expanded beyond being the keeper of old wounds. I started teaching again, writing of all things. I told my students that stories aren't about what happens but about what changes. Some of them nodded. Some didn't. I didn't need them to. Teaching had become less about being understood and more about being honest. Occasionally, Ethan would read something I wrote and pause on a sentence too long. "You're not writing from pain anymore," he said once. "You're writing from memory." That distinction mattered more than he knew. Then came the night everything almost collapsed, not from the past but from fear of repeating it. Ethan and Clara had their first real fracture. Not a fight, those are loud and temporary, but a quiet disagreement about children. He wanted to be ready. She wasn't sure she ever would be. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably, not sharp but heavy. 4 days I watched Ethan struggle, not with her answer but with his own expectations. The old instinct to compromise himself stirred. To stay quiet. To adjust his needs until they fit someone else's comfort. But this time he didn't disappear. They talked. Fully. Honestly. He told her what he wanted without demanding she become it. She told him her fear without apologizing for it. No ultimatums. No manipulation disguised as patience. They didn't resolve everything that night. But they stayed. Months later, Clara surprised him, not with a decision but with a question. "If we choose this together, would you still be you?" He answered without hesitation. "Only if you're still you too." That was the moment I knew they would be fine, even if life didn't unfold the way either of them imagined. Years from now, people might reduce this story to something simpler. A broken engagement. A fresh start. A happy ending. But that would miss the point. The real ending wasn't joy. It was freedom without loneliness. Connection without control. Love that didn't need anyone to shrink. And every now and then, when the world goes quiet enough, I still hear that truth echoing, steady, unafraid, and finally at peace with being spoken aloud.